Hello, friends. Good evening. Yesterday, we discussed a very interesting area of contract law, which is postal rule of communication. Today, we will understand it in a bit more detailed manner. We will discuss instantaneous mode of communication, which is different from postal communication, and we will understand how an instantaneous mode of communication of acceptance is different from postal mode of communication of acceptance. So let's start our discussion for today. But before that, let's do a quick recap of what we learned yesterday. We were discussing postal rule of communication. And before that, as all of you are aware, we are currently in our acceptance series. Where in the last class, our topic was when is acceptance complete? To understand this, we will have to look at two scenarios. One is when the communications between the offerer and the offeree is not instantaneous. Or you could say there is a time gap. To understand it even better, just think of it as the duration between when the offerer's offer is made known to the offeree and when the offeree's acceptance reaches the offerer. Now there's a time gap between that. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is one is when the offerer's offer is made known to the offeree and when the offeree's acceptance reaches the offerer. There is a time gap here. So suppose the offer was made at 4 p.m. on 12th January. And suppose further that this is the time when the offeree got to know about this offer. Offeree accepted the offer, but his acceptance reached the offerer at 4 p.m. on 13th January. So we can clearly see that there is a time gap between when the offer was made known to the offeree and when the acceptance reached the offerer. Whenever there is a time gap between these two events, the first event is when the offeree gets to know about the offer, and the second event is when the offeree's acceptance reaches the offerer. Whenever there is a time gap between these two, you will say that the communication is not instantaneous. The communication between the offerer and the offeree is not instantaneous. Okay? So that is what we discussed yesterday. And this is also famously known as the postal rule. Postal rule of communication. Why postal rule? Because whenever you post something, it takes time to reach the intended beneficiary or the recipient, not the beneficiary, but the recipient. Whoever you are sending your letter or post to, it takes some time for the post to reach that person. So, therefore, the communication is not instantaneous. Hence, this rule is known as postal rule of communication. And we will quickly discuss and revise whatever we saw yesterday. The first is we have an offerer, we have an offeree. Offerer makes an offer to the offeree. Offeree conveys his acceptance to the offerer. Now, when we are talking about postal rule, the first thing that we will have to keep in our mind is that acceptance by the offeree will bind the offerer the moment acceptance is posted. This is something that we had discussed in detail yesterday. Okay? If you remember the NLSIU example, we had discussed that in case NLSIU makes you an offer and that offer reaches you on 13th Jan, you post your acceptance on 14th Jan. The offeree NLSIU will be bound by your acceptance on 14th Jan itself, even if your letter reaches the offerer on 15th Jan. Okay, so this is the first principle that you have to keep in your mind, that the moment acceptance is posted by the offeree, the offerer is bound. And what is the meaning of this term, acceptance is posted? You can simply think of a situation where, let's say, you pull the trigger of a gun. After you have pulled the trigger, you cannot bring the bullet back in the gun. Okay, so whenever an acceptance is made in such a way that the offeree cannot recall his acceptance, we can say that the acceptance has been posted successfully. Example, if I post a letter to you, the moment my letter is put in the post box, my letter has been posted. I cannot recall it now. Okay, it will directly reach the recipient. So that is when acceptance is complete, when we are talking about the first point. And it is very important to understand both the elements. Number one, this acceptance will bind the offerer. And when will it bind the offerer? The moment it is posted. So you will have to understand both the things, meaning of posted, and second, that it will bind only the offerer at this stage and not the offeree. And we'll talk about that now. So we saw that it will bind the offerer. It means vis-a-vis the offerer, agreement is concluded the moment acceptance is posted. Okay, because as soon as you post the acceptance, acceptance is complete. So you have offer, you have acceptance, therefore you have a valid agreement in place. But this is only vis-a-vis the offerer. Only this offerer is bound by the agreement at this stage. Okay. Now we'll talk about when the offeree becomes bound. Let's discuss that vis-a-vis the offeree. Vis-a-vis the offeree, agreement is formed only when the offeree's acceptance reaches the offerer. Now, when we started discussing it, I told you about the time gap. If you remember that, you would notice that the moment you post your letter and the time when it is delivered to the recipient, there is a time gap between these two events. And your acceptance will be complete only when it is received by the offerer. Okay? And therefore, we have this peculiar rule in Indian Contract Act which says that the offerer will be bound by the agreement the moment acceptance is posted, which is the first event. But the offeree, he will be bound only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. And we know that there is a time gap between events 1 and 2. So therefore, the law gives this guy, the offeree, a unique opportunity of revoking his acceptance. How? If the offeree can revoke his acceptance before it reaches the offerer. Okay, so as I said, there is a time gap here between 1 and 2. Let's say it takes 24 hours for the post to reach the offerer. So the offeree can recall his offer by sending a revocation letter or by communicating his revocation of acceptance to the offerer before the expiry of 24 hours. And we had discussed this. So let's firstly write the rule. Offeree has an opportunity of revoking his acceptance. However, acceptance will need to be revoked before the acceptance reaches the offerer. Now let's take the NLSIU example that we had seen yesterday. Okay, NLSIU's offer was received by you on 13th Jan. Your acceptance was posted on 14th Jan. So NLSIU becomes bound here itself. Your letter reaches NLS on 15th Jan. You become bound by your acceptance once your letter reaches NLSIU. So you have this much time between 14th Jan and 15th Jan after you posted your acceptance and before your acceptance reached the offerer, which is NLSIU. So we can say after you posted your acceptance and before it reached NLSIU, which is the offerer, you can revoke your acceptance, but you will have to communicate your revocation before your acceptance reaches NLSIU, the offerer. So the revocation communication has to reach before the acceptance communication reaches. Okay, only then you as an offeree will be able to revoke your acceptance. That is the postal rule of communication. All right, today we will talk about, and also before we discuss instantaneous mode of communication, there's one more thing which we had discussed yesterday, which was place of agreement. When we are talking about postal rule, remember this: agreement is concluded at the place where acceptance is posted. All right, so let's look at the second category, where the mode of communication is instantaneous. It means there is no time gap. Time gap between which two events? These two events. When the offerer's offer is made known to the offeree and when the offeree's acceptance reaches the offerer, there is no time gap. Example, email. Although you can choose to reply to an email later, but if you decide to reply immediately, then there is no time gap. The moment you receive an email from somebody, you can immediately reply to that email, and that email will reach the recipient within a few seconds. Okay. Similarly, phone call, WhatsApp, etc. These are examples of instantaneous modes of communication. And we will have to understand when is acceptance complete when we are talking about instantaneous mode of communication. Let's start. Instantaneous mode of communication when is acceptance complete in this scenario. Okay, and let me give you examples once more so that you never forget it. Face-to-face communication, face-to-face communication, phone call, email, WhatsApp, all of these are examples of instantaneous modes of communication. And we will understand it by comparing it with postal rule. So on the left hand side, I will write postal rule, and on the right hand side, I will write instantaneous mode rule. All right. So in the postal rule, we saw that acceptance is complete vis-a-vis the offerer the moment it is posted. However, in an instantaneous mode of communication, acceptance is complete only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. We'll understand it with the help of an example, but for now just note it down. Acceptance is complete only when it reaches the offerer. In this case, postal rule, we discussed NLSIU and your example, okay, where NLSIU was the offerer, you were the offeree. You received the offer on 13th Jan, you posted your acceptance letter on 14th Jan. So in this case, acceptance is complete vis-a-vis NLSIU on 14th Jan itself when you posted the letter. But when you apply instantaneous mode rule, again, let's discuss if you apply this rule. Then by applying this rule, acceptance is completed on 15th Jan when your letter reaches an LSIU. But since there is a distinction between a postal mode of communication and instantaneous mode of communication, let's not confuse it with the NLSIU example. Let's take a different example to understand this. And if you remember, I had given you a question yesterday. Let's discuss that only. NLSIU made you an offer. Offerer, you are the offeree. NLSIU made you an offer that we'll be happy. We are offering you a seat in the BALLB program. And if you want to accept our offer, then please communicate your acceptance by email. So NLSIU also sent you an email and they want your acceptance by a return email. So email is an example of instantaneous mode of communication. In this case, we'll have to understand when is acceptance complete. As we discussed, in an instantaneous mode of communication, acceptance is complete only when it reaches the offerer, which it means that only when your email reaches an LSIU will the acceptance be complete. Now you can clearly see that there is a difference between postal rule of communication and instantaneous mode of communication rule. Had we applied the postal rule in this scenario, you would have said acceptance is complete the moment you posted that email, even if NLSIU did not receive it immediately. But that is not the law when it comes to instantaneous mode of communication. Instantaneous mode of communication rule clearly says that acceptance will be complete only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. It means, now let's take the second point. In the postal rule, we saw that vis-a-vis the offerer, agreement is concluded the moment acceptance is posted. And vis-a-vis the offeree, agreement is concluded only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. Okay, so we had looked at these two points while discussing the completion of or the conclusion of an agreement in a postal mode of communication. An instantaneous mode of communication is nothing but this rule. Here, when we are talking about instantaneous mode of communication, agreement is complete. Agreement is complete only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. It means that this point, the first one, this point has no, this point does not apply to instantaneous mode of communication. The first point here, this one does not apply to instantaneous mode of communication. Now let's look at let's take this email example a bit further. Okay, so I'd asked you yesterday that when you sent an email to NLSIU, after you sent your email, there was a network issue because of which NLSIU did not receive your email. Can we say that a valid agreement has arisen in this scenario? Okay, so this was the question that I had given you yesterday. In this case, NLSIU is the offerer, you are the offeree. Your email accepting NLSIU's offer did not reach NLSIU because of a technical glitch at Gmail's end. It may happen. Let's say that there's server issue, there is network outage, there could be there could be n number of issues, because of which your acceptance email did not reach NLSIU. Question: is your acceptance complete? Because only when the acceptance is complete do we have an agreement. Answer is no. The acceptance is not complete. And why are we saying that? Because our principle clearly says that agreement is complete only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. Okay, it means that it is a fact that your acceptance did not reach NLSIU because of a technical glitch, and therefore there is no agreement. For an agreement, we needed both offer and acceptance, but since your acceptance is not complete, as it did not reach the offerer, which is NLSIU, therefore there is no agreement, because your acceptance never reached the offerer. Okay, let's take another example. I make you an offer on telephone. I say, will you buy my iPhone at rupees 50,000? And you are willing to buy my iPhone. So the moment you start saying yes, but after that the phone gets disconnected because of network issue. Question is, do we have a valid agreement in this scenario? So let's write it down. A and B. A makes an offer to B. Will you buy my iPhone at 50,000? Okay. B, the moment he starts saying or he starts accepting, phone gets disconnected. And A had made an offer on a telephone call. So before B could communicate his acceptance, the phone got disconnected. Question: do we have a valid agreement? We will have to look at the principle and apply the relevant tests here. First test is it an instantaneous mode of communication? The answer is yes, which means that we don't have to apply the postal rule. Second, when is an agreement complete in an instantaneous mode of communication? You will have to apply these you will have to ask these two questions to yourself. When is an agreement complete in an instantaneous mode of communication? The answer is when the acceptance reaches the offerer. In our A and B example, did B's acceptance reach A? That is the relevant question. Did B's acceptance reach A? Answer is no, because the phone got disconnected before B could complete his acceptance. So A never heard B accepting the offer, and since the offerer, which is A, did not receive the acceptance, this is the acceptance is not complete, and therefore there is no agreement. And remember, we are talking about instantaneous mode of communication. The third point is in postal rule. So left hand side is postal rule. We talked about place of agreement. So place of agreement is where the acceptance is posted. If you remember, we had discussed this. Wherever the offeree posts his or her acceptance, that is where the agreement has been formed. Okay. In an instantaneous mode of communication, place of agreement is where acceptance is received by the offerer. Okay. So postal rule, if you remember, NLSIU made you an offer from Bangalore. You posted your acceptance letter at Delhi. Okay. Question was, where has this agreement been formed? The answer is Delhi, because the acceptance letter was posted at Delhi. But when we are talking about instantaneous mode of communication, NLSIU makes you an offer from Bangalore using email, which is an instantaneous mode of communication. You convey your acceptance from Delhi using email only. Question: where has this agreement been formed? This agreement has been formed at Bangalore, because we just saw the place of agreement in case of instantaneous mode of communication is where acceptance is received by the offerer. Where did NLSIU receive your acceptance? They received it in Bangalore because they are based out of Bangalore. Okay, so this is a crucial distinction between postal rule of communication and instantaneous mode of communication. All right, so let's summarize. Number one, when communication is by post, or you can say it is non-instantaneous mode of communication. Agreement is formed, or complete agreement is formed slash complete number one. We'll have to look at two things. So always remember, in postal rule of communication, agreement is formed vis-a-vis the offerer at a different time and vis-a-vis the offeree at a different time. So vis-a-vis the offerer, agreement is formed when the acceptance is posted, vis-a-vis the offerer when the acceptance is posted, and vis-a-vis hold on, vis-a-vis the offeree, it is formed only when the acceptance reaches the offerer. Okay. Number two, same postal rule. Offeree can revoke his acceptance during the time gap by faster communication. Okay. Place of agreement in postal rule where acceptance is posted. Now, these 3 points are regarding postal rule. Instantaneous rule. Number one, agreement is formed only when acceptance is received by the offerer. Place of agreement is where the acceptance is received. All right. So understand this concept, understand all of these things, think about it, apply it to real world scenarios, and then see if whatever we learned today makes any sense in our daily communications that we have with our friends, with other people, where lots of offers are being made by people each day. Okay, and if you remember these points, I can guarantee you that questions on completion of acceptance will not be difficult for you, and you will not get confused between postal rule and instantaneous rule. All right, in the next class, we will move ahead with the next concept under acceptance. Until then, revise today's topic and practice questions. Okay, thank you so much.